My name is Sera Voss and I am 24 years old. 11 months ago, I walked into a hospital room in Asheville, North Carolina, and found my mother sitting beside my father's bed, holding a document she had no legal right to hold, a document that would have transferred his medical decision-making to her permanently, quietly, and without my father ever knowing what he had signed. My father had been unconscious for 6 days. The stroke had come without warning on a Tuesday morning in October, the kind that takes a man mid-sentence and leaves him somewhere behind his own eyes. He was 58 years old and he had been asking me for 3 years to be his healthcare proxy. We had talked about it at his kitchen table in November of 2021, over coffee and the pecan rolls he made every weekend. He had slid a handwritten note across the table with 2 names on it. Mine and his attorney's. He had said, "You're the one I trust, Sera. You always have been." I had driven straight to the attorney's office the following Monday. The paperwork was filed and notarized by 11 a.m. But here is what my mother did not know when she sat in that hospital room with her own document, the one she had printed from a legal forms website and persuaded a notary at a UPS store to stamp. She did not know that I had been my father's healthcare proxy for 3 years. She did not know that his attorney had a copy. She did not know that I had a copy in a gray accordion folder in the trunk of my car, which was parked 40 feet from the hospital's front entrance. And she did not know that the charge nurse on the 3rd floor had already called me. Before I tell you what happened when I walked into that room, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Drop your city and the time it is where you are in the comments. I genuinely love reading those. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand what happened in that hospital room, you have to understand what kind of woman my mother is, and what kind of man my father always was, and why those 2 things were never quite compatible. I grew up in a small city called Weaverville, which sits just north of Asheville in the Blue Ridge foothills. My father, Dale Voss, worked as a structural engineer for a regional firm that did bridge and roadway contracts across western North Carolina. He wore the same 4 flannel shirts in rotation from October through March and kept a thermos of black coffee on his desk that he never quite finished. He was the kind of man who read the manual before assembling anything and who kept a file folder for every utility bill going back to 1994. He was precise and patient, and he loved me in a way that never needed explaining. My mother, Renata Voss, was a different architecture entirely. She had grown up in Charlotte in a family with money and opinions, and she had never quite forgiven Weaverville for being neither. She taught piano lessons out of our living room 3 afternoons a week, and she wore silk blouses to the grocery store, and she had a way of looking at a room and identifying immediately who in it was worth her attention. I was not usually worth her attention. My brother Marcus was. Marcus was 4 years older than me. He played varsity soccer, tested into the gifted program in 6th grade, and had a smile that my mother described, without irony, as the kind that opens doors. She said this at dinner once when I was 9 years old and Marcus had been accepted into a summer leadership program at the university. I remember asking what kind of smile I had. My mother had set down her fork and looked at me with the patient expression of a woman explaining traffic patterns to a child. "You have a quiet face, Sera," she said. That's useful too, in its own way. I thought about that sentence for years. The way it was shaped to sound like a compliment and function like a ceiling. Marcus got the piano lessons for free, naturally. I got them too, for 2 years, until my mother decided I lacked the discipline and redirected the time to Marcus's lessons with a more advanced teacher she drove him to in Asheville every Saturday. I did not lack discipline. I simply did not perform enthusiasm in the way my mother required. I practiced every day. I just practiced quietly, in the late afternoon when no one was watching, and I never asked to be heard. That, I think, was the problem. My father noticed. He always noticed. He came home from work one evening when I was 11 and found me at the piano running through a piece I had taught myself from a library book, a simplified Chopin nocturne that I had been working on for 3 weeks. He stood in the doorway for a long time without saying anything. Then he came and sat beside me on the bench and listened to the whole thing. When I finished, he said, "Where did you learn that?" I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what I think? I think the best kind of work is the kind you do when nobody's watching. That's the kind that sticks." He said things like that. Small, precise things that I carried. Marcus went to the University of North Carolina on a partial academic scholarship and a check from my mother's parents that covered the rest. I went to Western Carolina University on a combination of need-based aid, a small merit scholarship, and a part-time job at a coffee shop on Main Street in Cullowhee where I worked 22 hours a week. I did not ask my parents for money. I had tried once, in the spring of my senior year of high school, when I was assembling my financial aid package and realized I was about $4,200 short of covering my first year. I sat down with my mother at the kitchen table with a printed spreadsheet. She looked at it for about 30 seconds, set it face down, and said, "Sera, your father and I helped Marcus through school. We can't do it twice." I pointed out that Marcus's grandparents had paid for most of Marcus's school. She said, "That was a gift that came with conditions, and those conditions don't apply here." She did not explain what the conditions were. I did not ask. I went back to my room and applied for 2 more scholarships and got one of them. I want to be clear that I am not telling you this to perform suffering. I am telling you because the architecture of a family's love is built early, and you carry the blueprint whether you want to or not. By the time I was 18, I knew my exact dimensions in my mother's floor plan. I was a load-bearing wall. Necessary, invisible, never the room anyone came to see. My father knew this too. I think it pained him in a way he did not know how to address directly, because addressing it would have required a conversation with my mother that he had been avoiding for 25 years. So instead, he showed up. He drove 2 hours to Cullowhee for every parents' weekend. He called every Sunday at 7 in the evening. He sent cards on my birthday with handwritten notes that were specific and real, not the generic warmth of obligation. And in the fall of my junior year, when I told him I wanted to go into healthcare administration, He sat with me for an entire afternoon going through program options and job placement rates and licensing requirements with the same focus he brought to a bridge load analysis. "You're going to be good at this," he said. "You're organized and you don't panic and you actually listen to people. That's rarer than a degree." I graduated in 3.5 years. I took a position as an administrative coordinator at a regional medical center in Asheville 2 weeks after my 22nd birthday. By 24, I had been promoted to patient services manager, which meant I understood, at a level most people don't, exactly how healthcare proxy documents work, exactly what they authorize, and exactly what happens when there are competing claims. My mother did not attend my graduation ceremony. She had a scheduling conflict with a recital she was hosting for her students. She sent a card that said "Congratulations on your hard work" in her handwriting and included a $20 gift card to a coffee chain. I thanked her by text. I did not cry. I had stopped expecting her attendance at things years before I stopped hoping for it. Those are two different milestones, and the first one comes much earlier. My father was there. He sat in the second row and he wore his good flannel, the navy one, and he took photographs on his phone with the careful attention of someone documenting something important. Afterward, he took me to a restaurant in Asheville and ordered a bottle of wine he couldn't really afford and gave a toast that lasted 4 minutes and made the couple at the next table applaud. I still have the photograph from that dinner. He is grinning in it. So am I. That was May of 2022. 18 months later, he had a stroke. In the years between my graduation and my father's stroke, my relationship with my mother had settled into a kind of managed distance. We spoke on holidays. We texted occasionally. Marcus had moved back to Charlotte after graduate school and was working in commercial lending, and my mother's world had contracted pleasantly around him. His girlfriend, his apartment, his career trajectory. I was the background frequency. Present enough not to be a problem. Absent enough not to require attention. I had built something real in Asheville. I had a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city that I shared with a friend named Priya, who was finishing her residency in internal medicine and who had the particular gift of making a cramped kitchen feel like a good place to be. I had a job I was genuinely good at. I had a small circle of people who knew me accurately. And I had my father's Sunday calls, which I counted on the way you count on a structural element. You don't think about it until it's gone. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday. October 14th, at 6:47 in the morning. It was my father's neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Gwen Altizer who had lived next door to my parents for 19 years. She had found my number in a list my father kept on his refrigerator under a magnet shaped like the Blue Ridge Parkway. She said, "Honey, your daddy collapsed in the driveway. They've taken him to Mission Hospital. You need to come." I was in my car in 11 minutes. I called my manager from the highway. I called Marcus from the I-26 on-ramp and left a message when he didn't pick up. I drove the 40 minutes to Asheville in 34 and parked in the hospital garage at 7:52 a.m. My mother was already there. She was sitting in the family consultation room off the third-floor nurse's station in a camel-colored wool coat and pearl earrings, which told me she had gone home and changed before coming to the hospital. My father had been unconscious since the paramedics arrived. She had been at the house when it happened. She had ridden in the ambulance. And at some point between the ambulance and the consultation room, she had made a phone call. I know this because the charge nurse, a woman named Deborah who had been on the floor for 14 years, pulled me into the hallway before I reached the consultation room and said quietly, "Ms. Voss, I need to tell you something before you go in there. Your mother presented a document about an hour ago. A healthcare proxy form. She's claiming to be your father's decision maker." Deborah's voice was careful and neutral in the way that nurses' voices get when they're telling you something they are not supposed to have an opinion about. "I've been trying to reach the attending, but I wanted you to know." I thanked her. My hands did not shake. I went to my car. The gray accordion folder was in the trunk, exactly where I had put it when I reorganized my files in August. I pulled out the section labeled with my father's name. Inside, a copy of the durable healthcare proxy document, notarized November 8, 2021, naming me, Sera Lynn Voss, as Dale Voss's sole healthcare proxy. A copy of the attorney's confirmation letter. And a handwritten note from my father on his engineering firm's letterhead, dated the same week, that said simply, "Sera knows what I want. Trust her." I walked back into the hospital with the folder under my arm. I want to pause here for a moment, because I know some of you watching this have been in a room like that consultation room. Maybe not a hospital. Maybe a lawyer's office, or a church, or a kitchen table where someone was sitting in a chair that wasn't theirs to sit in, holding a document they had manufactured, wearing an expression of calm authority they had rehearsed. And you know that particular cold that settles in your chest, not anger exactly, something quieter and more clarifying than anger. The feeling of watching someone try to erase you from your own life. If you've ever had someone try to make a decision for you that you had already made for yourself, type the word proxy in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one. And if this story is resonating with you, please subscribe. It takes 2 seconds and it means we can keep making these. Now, back to the story. My mother looked up when I came into the consultation room. She was sitting across from a young hospitalist named Dr. Nair, who had a tablet in front of him and the expression of a man who had walked into a situation he had not anticipated. On the table between them was a printed form, 2 pages, stapled in the upper left corner. I could see from the doorway that it had a UPS store notary stamp. I had processed enough paperwork in my job to recognize one at 20 feet. "Sera," my mother said. Her voice was composed. "I'm glad you're here. We're just sorting out some paperwork." I set the accordion folder on the table and opened it. I took out the notarized proxy document and placed it in front of Dr. Nair. I placed the attorney's confirmation letter beside it. I placed my father's handwritten note beside that. "I'm Dale Voss's healthcare proxy," I said. These documents were filed November 8, 2021, with attorney Robert Kane of Kane and Associates in Weaverville. I have his office number if you need to verify. Dr. Nair looked at the documents. He looked at the form my mother had brought. He looked at the notary stamps. He was quiet for approximately 10 seconds. My mother said, "Sera, your father and I discussed this. He wanted me involved in these decisions. We've been married for 30 years. He wanted you informed," I said. "He wanted me to make the decisions. There's a document that says so." That document, my mother said, and her voice had taken on the particular temperature it reached when she was managing a situation, was signed when your father was going through a difficult period. He and I had talked about updating it. He didn't update it, I said. He intended to. Intentions aren't documents. She looked at me then with an expression I had seen before, the one that meant I had stepped outside the dimensions she had assigned me and she was recalibrating. There was something in it that was almost respect, and something in it that was much older and harder than respect. Dr. Nair excused himself to consult with the attending and the hospital's patient advocacy office. He took both sets of documents with him. He came back 27 minutes later and confirmed that the 2021 proxy was valid and controlling, that my mother's form presented competing claims that would require legal review, and that in the interim, medical decisions would be handled according to established protocol pending clarification. He was careful and professional, and I could see he was relieved to have a clear document to stand behind. My mother did not speak to me for the rest of that day. She sat in the waiting room in her camel coat, and she made phone calls, and she sent texts, and she looked at the wall with the expression of a woman revising a plan. Marcus arrived at 2 in the afternoon, having driven up from Charlotte after getting my message. He walked in already knowing her version of events. I could tell by the way he looked at me, with the slightly apologetic, slightly defensive expression of a man who has been briefed. "Mom says you're trying to lock her out of Dad's care," he said. "Dad asked me to be his proxy 3 years ago," I said. "I am his proxy. I have the documents. She's his wife, Sera. I know what she is." Marcus sat down across from me. He was 38 years old and he looked, in that moment, like a man who had spent his whole life standing at the edge of a conflict and deciding not to step in. He had his mother's instinct for positioning and his father's discomfort with confrontation, and the combination had made him, over the years, a very effective bystander. "Can't you just work together on this?" he said. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about the piano lessons. I thought about the $4,200. I thought about the graduation ceremony my mother had not attended and the Sunday calls my father had never missed. I thought about my father lying in a room 40 feet away with tubes in his arm and a woman who had gone home to change her clothes before coming to the hospital. "I'm going to do what Dad asked me to do," I said. "That's it." Marcus nodded slowly. He went and sat beside my mother. I went and sat beside my father. The next 6 days were the longest of my life. My father remained unconscious, then minimally responsive, then, slowly, unevenly, present. The medical team was excellent. I attended every briefing, asked every question, took notes in a small green spiral notebook I bought from the hospital gift shop. I made decisions about medication adjustments and therapy protocols in consultation with the neurologist, a quiet woman named Dr. Fenton, who had steady hands and a habit of explaining things twice to make sure you had understood. I called my father's primary care physician. I contacted his cardiologist. I built a binder. My mother sat in the waiting room and, on the 3rd day, retained an attorney. I found out about the attorney from Gwen Altizer, who had become a fixture in the waiting room and who had the particular gift of knowing everything that was happening in any room she occupied. Gwen was 71 years old and had taught 4th grade for 33 years and had opinions about everything that she expressed in the gentle, non-negotiable tone of a woman who had managed 28 9-year-olds at a time. She told me, on the morning of the 3rd day, that my mother had been on the phone for 2 hours the previous evening and that she had heard the words "challenge the proxy" and "grounds for revision." I called Robert Kane that afternoon. He was my father's attorney and, by extension, mine in this matter, and he had a voice like a patient professor and an organizational mind that matched my father's. He confirmed that the 2021 document was sound, that a challenge would require proving my father had lacked capacity when he signed it or had expressed a subsequent change of intent in writing, and that he had neither done nor documented either of those things. He said, "Sera, the document is clean. Let them file if they want to file. It won't go anywhere." He paused. "Your father was very clear about this when we drew it up, by the way." He said, "Robert, Sera is the one who will actually show up. Make it official." I wrote that down in my green notebook. I did not cry. I sat in the hallway outside my father's room for 4 minutes with my eyes closed, and then I went back inside. I'm going to stop here for a moment, because I want to say something directly to you. If you are watching this and you have a parent who is aging, or a sibling who has made it clear they see your family's resources as theirs to manage, or a mother who has spent 30 years making you feel like the quiet wall instead of the room, please hear me. The paperwork matters. The documents matter. The conversations you have at kitchen tables over pecan rolls matter, but only if you follow them with a notary stamp. Not because your family will definitely do what mine did, but because love without documentation is just a feeling, and feelings can be contested. Documents cannot. Type the word document in the comments if you have ever had to fight for something that should have been yours without a fight. And please subscribe if you haven't already. We tell stories here that don't get told anywhere else. Now, back to the story. On the morning of day 7, my father opened his eyes and said my name. It came out slow and slightly wrong. The stroke had affected his speech in ways the team said were likely temporary, but it was my name, and he said it looking directly at me, and I held his hand and told him he was at Mission Hospital and that I was there and that everything was being handled. He squeezed my hand once. His grip was weaker than I had ever felt it. He looked at me for a long time and then he closed his eyes again and slept. My mother was in the room. She had come in 15 minutes earlier and was standing near the window in her camel coat, which she had apparently worn every day, or had multiples of, because I had not seen her in anything else. When my father said my name, something crossed her face that I had not expected and did not know how to categorize. It was not jealousy exactly. It was the expression of a woman who had just received information she already knew but had been successfully avoiding. She left the room without speaking. My father's recovery was slow and real. By the end of the second week, he was speaking in full sentences with only occasional hesitations. By the end of the third week, he was sitting up and eating solid food and asking Dr. Fenton pointed questions about his medication interactions that she said she appreciated. He was going to need months of rehabilitation. He was going to need modifications to his house. He was going to need someone to manage his care coordination, which is, as it happens, exactly what I do for a living. The attorney my mother had retained sent a letter to Robert Kane on day 9. It cited my father's marriage, my mother's 30-year role as his partner, and a claim that the proxy document had been signed during a period of marital discord without my mother's knowledge. It requested a meeting to discuss a more equitable arrangement for shared decision-making. Robert Kane's response was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph documented the date and circumstances of the proxy signing, including the fact that my father had been in excellent cognitive health at the time, as confirmed by his primary care physician's records. The second paragraph noted that North Carolina law does not require a spouse's consent for a competent adult to designate a healthcare proxy and that marital status does not supersede a valid legal document. The third paragraph said that his client, meaning my father, had been asked directly by the attending physician, once he regained sufficient capacity on day 8, whether he wished to make any changes to his existing healthcare proxy designation. My father had said no. This had been documented in the medical record at 10:22 a.m. on October 22nd. My mother's attorney did not respond to that letter. There is a thing that happens in families like mine, families built around a favorite child and a quiet one, around a mother who distributes love like a resource with limited supply. The thing that happens is that the quiet child spends years believing the problem is her quietness. That if she were louder, more visible, more like the favored one, the distribution would change. She adjusts herself. She makes herself smaller, then larger, then smaller again, trying to find the configuration that earns what should never have required earning. What I learned in that hospital, over those weeks, sitting beside my father's bed with my green notebook in my accordion folder, is that the problem was never my quietness. The problem was that my mother had decided, very early, that I was a certain kind of person, and she had committed to that decision with the same energy she brought to everything else in her life. My quietness was not the cause. It was just the container she had poured her decision into. My father came home from the rehabilitation facility on December 19th. I had taken 2 weeks of family leave and spent them coordinating the modifications to his house, the grab bars, the shower chair, the rearranged kitchen so his most used items were at elbow height. I had set up his medication schedule in a system that Priya helped me design, color-coded by time of day, with a backup alarm on a simple digital clock by his bed. I had arranged for a home health aide 3 mornings a week and a physical therapist twice weekly. My mother was at the house when he arrived. She had decorated for Christmas, which was something she was genuinely good at. The house looked warm and careful, pine boughs on the mantel, white lights in the window, the smell of something baking. I noticed she had also rearranged the kitchen in a way that undid about half of what I had set up. I put it back after she left that evening without saying anything about it. My father noticed. He noticed from his chair in the living room, watching me move things back to where I had put them, and he said, "She means well, Sera." He said it the way he had always said things about my mother, with the particular exhaustion of a man who had been translating between 2 people for 30 years. "I know," I said. "She was scared," he said. "When I collapsed. She was scared and she didn't know what to do." "She knew what to do," I said. "She just didn't like the answer." He was quiet for a moment. The Christmas lights reflected off his glasses. He looked older than he had before the stroke, and also, in some way I couldn't precisely name, more himself. As if the illness had stripped away some performance he had been maintaining and left only the actual person. "I should have handled things better," he said. "Between you and her. Over the years. I let too much go." "You showed up," I said. "Every time." "That's not the same as fixing it." "No," I said. "But it's what I needed." We sat with that for a while. The oven timer went off in the kitchen. Outside, it had started to snow, the thin dry snow of the Carolina mountains in December, the kind that doesn't stick but makes the air look like something from a different century. Marcus called on Christmas Eve. He had not come to Asheville for the homecoming, had sent a fruit basket instead, and had been largely absent from the hospital weeks in a way that I had filed away without comment. He called my cell phone at 8:15 in the evening and said, "I want you to know I think you did the right thing." He said it quickly, like a man completing a task he had been putting off. "With Dad. The proxy thing. I should have said that sooner." I told him I appreciated it. I did not tell him that his saying it sooner would have changed something, because I wasn't sure that was true, and I had learned, by then, to be careful about what I asked for from people who had shown me their capacity. My mother and I did not have a conversation about the hospital. Not in December, not in the months that followed. She came to my father's house twice a week to cook and do laundry, and I came on different days to manage his care coordination and sit with him in the evenings. We had organized ourselves, without discussing it, into a schedule that kept us mostly separate. It was not a resolution. It was a structure. Sometimes a structure is what you build when a resolution isn't available. In February, my father told me something he had been holding since the hospital. He told me that on the morning of the stroke, before he collapsed in the driveway, he and my mother had argued. He didn't tell me what the argument was about. He said only that it had been about me, and that he had said something to her that he had never said before in 30 years of marriage. Something about the way she had treated me, and that she had not taken it well. He said, "I don't know if that matters to you. I just wanted you to know I said it." I thought about that for a long time. About a man having a stroke 40 minutes after finally saying the thing he should have said years earlier. About the terrible timing of truth in families. About how long people can carry a thing before the weight of it finds a way out. "It matters," I said. In March, I found a letter in my father's filing cabinet that I had not known existed. I was reorganizing his files as part of the ongoing care management, creating a system that the home health aide could navigate, and in the back of a hanging folder labeled personal I found an envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. The envelope was sealed. The date on the outside was November 2021, the same month as the proxy signing. I sat down on the floor of his study with the envelope in my hands. My father was in the living room with the physical therapist. I could hear the quiet count of exercises through the wall. Inside the envelope was 2 pages of his engineering firm's letterhead, covered in his small, precise handwriting. He had written it the week we filed the proxy. He had written it, I think, because he understood something about his own body that he had not said out loud, a tiredness, a pressure, something he had noticed and not yet named. He had written it because he was the kind of man who prepared for the structures he could foresee. He wrote about my childhood. He wrote about the piano lessons and the graduation he attended alone and the Sunday calls and the coffee shop in Kolohi. He wrote about watching me build something real from a starting point that had been made harder than it needed to be. He wrote, in his careful engineer's language, about load distribution, about how a structure fails when the weight is not shared fairly, and about how some structures compensate by developing unexpected strength in the places that bear the most. He wrote, near the end, "Sera, I have not always done right by you in the ways that required confrontation. I am sorry for that. What I can do is make sure that when I am not able to speak for myself, the right person speaks for me. You have always known what I needed before I did. That is not a quiet thing. That is the most important thing." I sat on the floor of his study for 12 minutes. My hands did not shake. I read the letter twice and then I folded it and put it back in the envelope and held it against my chest for a moment. And then I got up and went back to the filing cabinet and kept working. My father is doing well now. His speech has almost fully recovered. He walks with a cane on uneven ground and without one on flat surfaces. He made pecan rolls last Sunday for the first time since the stroke, and he called me while they were in the oven to tell me they were happening. And I drove over and we ate them at the kitchen table with black coffee and talked about nothing important for 2 hours. He looked like himself. He looked like the man in the photograph from my graduation dinner, the one who is grinning. My mother and I exist in the structure we built. She does not acknowledge the hospital, and I do not require her to. I have stopped waiting for her to see me the way my father sees me. That waiting was always going to cost more than the thing I was waiting for. Some people's capacity for love is genuinely limited, not as cruelty, just as fact. The way some bridges are rated for a certain load and not a pound more. You can be angry about the engineering, or you can route your traffic accordingly. I have spent enough years being angry about the engineering. What I have instead is this: a father who is alive and recovering because the right document was in the right folder in the trunk of the right car. A green notebook full of medical notes that I will keep for years. A friend named Priya who made soup every night of those hospital weeks and left it in the refrigerator with handwritten labels. A job that taught me, without meaning to, exactly what I would need to know when it mattered most. A letter in my father's handwriting that I have read enough times that the paper has gone soft at the folds. And I have the thing my father told me at that kitchen table in November of 2021, when he slid a piece of paper across to me with 2 names on it. I have the thing he said when I asked him why he was doing this now. Why this conversation? Why today? He put his coffee cup down and he looked at me with the direct, undecorated look he had always given me, the look that never needed anything from me in return. And he said, "Because you're the one who shows up, Sera. You always have been. I just want to make sure the world knows it too." I showed up. The world knew it. The document made sure of that. If you are watching this and you have been the quiet one, the one who was told your face was useful in its own way, the one who paid your own way and attended your own graduation and built something real from a starting point that was harder than it needed to be, I want you to hear me. Your quietness is not your limitation. It is your precision. The people who dismissed it were reading the wrong instrument. Get the paperwork done. Have the conversation at the kitchen table. Follow it with a notary stamp. Not because your family will fail you, but because love, real love, the kind that shows up and keeps showing up, deserves to be protected. And if someone in your life has ever been your father, the one who drove 2 hours and gave the 4-minute toast and called every Sunday at 7, tell them. Write it down if you have to. Put it in an envelope. Leave it somewhere they'll find it. That's the whole story. That's all of it. Drop a comment below and tell me what you thought. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.